So we just finished our second year of raising chickens for meat on our homestead. And one of the questions we've been having along the way is it worth it? What's the cost that we are spending to raise these chickens versus what we are getting from them? And so we kind of broke down all of the costs that we spent and kind of compared that to with what we got from it. And we're gonna share all the details of that with you. Just to give you kind of a starting point of what we're working with here, we raised roughly 64 chickens on our farm this past summer. One big batch of Freedom Rangers. So Freedom Rangers are not your typical Cornish cross meat chicken. They take much longer to raise. So instead of like 6 to 8 weeks, which is what the Cornish cross takes, Freedom Rangers, it took us about 12 weeks to get them to butchering weight.
Yeah, so 64 are what made it into the freezer, what we have to eat. And so the first cost that you start with is buying your baby chicks. We got them from a local feed store that just gets shipments in from a local hatchery, and they cost $2.15 a piece. So we'll throw up some slides that kind of show the breakdown of this. And with all
of these numbers, you just have to keep in mind that they're all going to be slightly different depending on your situation and where you live. This is just kind of our situation and where we live.
Yeah, because we've heard like as much as 3 or 4 times that amount per baby chick if you're living in like real rural areas or areas it's hard to get deliveries, shipments to. But we paid $2.15 a piece. We paid for 60 birds. We actually ended up getting like 70 or something. They always throw a few extra in, but this year they were really generous and gave us a whole bunch, and then we ended up with 64, like we said, that made it into the freezer in the end. Our average weight for our chickens that after butchering them was 4.7 pounds. And so if we take 4.7 times the 64 birds that we had, and we figured about $5 a pound is
that's kind of average in our area. We probably live in maybe a little bit more expensive area than some places, maybe less than others. But $5 per pound for kind of organic free-range chicken meat is, I would say, pretty average.
Yeah, and so if we kind of multiplied all that up, we have about $1,500 worth of chickens if we were to sell those, or I guess the reverse of that is if we were to go out and purchase 64 chickens for ourselves, from a local farm, we'd be paying around $1,500. So that's our starting point. Then to break down the cost of feed, obviously feed is going to be your biggest expense for your chickens. And so we were paying about $20 per 50-pound bag of feed. And again, this is organic, non-GMO, pretty high quality feed that we were getting in kind of bulk from a local supplier. And then we actually switched suppliers halfway through roughly, and then we were paying about $18 per 50-pound bag. And so in total, we purchased 25 bags is what it took to get the chickens through from chicks to when they were butchered. And that costed us $522.67. We did the math. There was about 1,250 pounds of feed divided by 65 birds because we had one die that we didn't butcher that was basically fully grown. So 1,250 divided by 65 came out to just over 19 pounds per bird. It was like 19.2 pounds per bird. And that basically goes in line with what we had heard. Usually for meat chickens, you hear around like 16 to 20 pounds range to raise a meat chicken. And so we were kind of on the higher end of that, but right within that range.
Yeah, so we did not, in this breakdown, we did not consider kind of those one-time purchases for raising meat chickens, like the costs of building chicken tractors, the costs of feeders and waterers. So these are other costs that we have had to incur in order to raise chickens for meat. However, with the one-time nature of those costs and not the ongoing, we did not use those to calculate kind of the per bird cost of raising them. But you do want to kind of consider that, as you do have those costs as well. But then the other big cost in kind of this meat raising process is butchering costs. And so depending on which route you go with this, whether you take them to a local processor or whether you do it yourself, it's going to change your costs. We did it ourselves, and so one of the big costs was the bags, the poultry bags that we bagged the chickens in. And so we like to get the high quality shrink wrap bags, and we had to get a brand new package of 100 bags. So that costed us about $55. We also needed to get a propane tank for the scalder and for our turkey fryer that we use to bag the chickens at the end of the process. And so that was about 20 bucks. And then we also actually paid about $150 in hiring a couple of our neighbor kids to come help us butcher, because we did it on a weekday and we just didn't have the extra help, and our kids aren't really of an age where they are super helpful yet. And so that just ended up being the easiest thing, is to hire some of our neighbors to come help us to butcher. And so we ended up spending, about $220, $225 to butcher them. Now, we were actually quoted from a local chicken processing facility about $4.50 per bird to have them do it. So we actually only ended up saving about $50 total doing the processing ourselves versus what it would have cost us to bring it to them to do it at the processing facility. Keep in mind that $4.50 per bird was taking our chickens in with some other farmers who had kind of a bulk order of chickens going in, and so I think it was more of a bulk rate. It probably would have been a bit more expensive per bird than that had it just been us bringing in 60 chickens. But regardless, I think we did not really end up saving that much doing it ourselves, especially with hiring our neighbors. But our costs could have been, if we were like renting the plucker and the scalder and some of the equipment involved, our costs could have been quite a bit higher than they were. Really, it was pretty affordable, being that we were able to just borrow a lot of that equipment. Yeah, so when we broke down those numbers kind of at the end, it made us think maybe next year we would consider taking our chickens to a processing facility, just with the kind of stage of life we are in with really young kids. That just might be easier for us. But again, something that you need to weigh on your own. Yeah, and when we did live in the middle of Amish country, there was an Amish family that was willing to butcher chickens for, it was like $2.50 per bird or something like that. And so you should totally ask around too and see what options there are in the area, because like at $2.50 a bird, that's, a no-brainer. Really good. So basically, all in all, it ended up costing us about $13.70 to raise each of our chickens. And so each of our chickens cost about $13.70. And if you calculate what their weight was and how much we would have spent on a chicken, it would have been about $23.50. And so when you break that down, all in all, by raising them ourselves, we would make about $10 per chicken if we were going to sell them to someone else, or versus the cost that we would spend to purchase them from another farm. So $10 per chicken was kind of our overall savings per bird. Yeah, which we were really happy with. I mean, as a homestead, we're raising the food for ourselves. As long as we're saving money, that's a great and obviously you can't take into account the fact that you know how they're being raised, you know they're being treated with care and respect throughout the process, you know exactly what they're eating, you know all of those things. And so you know those are not guarantees that you have when you purchase them other places. And so so you just kind of have to weigh it out. But that's what we ended up saving, $10 per bird. So those are our numbers. Yeah, so that's the total breakdown, what we spent for raising our own meat chickens this year on our homestead. So what's been your experience? We'd love to hear from you. Drop something in the comments below. Yeah, are we in line with kind of what you've experienced, or is this totally different? We'd love to hear. Yeah, so thanks so much for stopping by the farmstead, and we'll see you next time.